There has to be a way that we as American Muslims inject ourselves in the conversation and steer it to the right direction. Because the problem with this issue is the response. We saw after 9/11 the type of response that was initiated by our country. At times it was a very problematic response because we went through a trauma. We saw things like the Patriot Act. We saw things like the immediate invasion into Afghanistan. We saw the invasion of Iraq. We saw a lot of abuses in the name of national security because of this issue. And we as a community were not in the forefront of those conversations to push back against that, to say we cannot overreact. Because the whole psychology of terrorism is that it makes you overreact.
Yeah.
That is what terrorism is meant to do. Terrorism is a social, a public act of violence based on religion, based on ideology, based on a social understanding that has a very public impact and makes society react to that impact. And unfortunately, if we are not a nation that is, it's a nation that understands the threat, that puts it into perspective, and that's resilient, then we overreact. Because as I always tell people, we can't kill our way out of this problem. You can't Patriot Act your way out of this problem. You can't spy your way or surveillance your way out of this problem. This problem is very specific. It needs to be diagnosed, and then it needs to be addressed by experts and those who are who can take this on. And so I understand the hesitation a lot of times for our community members because we don't want to be held responsible. Just like I have a 11-year-old son who sometimes asks me about these questions. I don't want my son to feel the burden of having to answer for people who claim his faith. But at the same time, I need to equip my son with the tools to be able to push back and fight back and understand the threat and the problem and be able to engage so that we can find solutions as we move to the future.
You are right. What I dream for your 11 years old son is to have the clarity and the comfort to say, I don't know the details, but what I know is killing people is haram, is prohibited in our religion, period. He doesn't need to know or to acquire sophisticated knowledge to enter into a debate at this age. But his aura of confidence about himself and his values and his religion will protect him, as a matter of fact, will shelter him. People always step on the victims, and we should never be victims. We are very valuable to the country in which we live. And as a matter of fact, as you just mentioned, people who are experts, but they don't understand the whole complexity, we are more needed than those so-called experts. They are not seeing the guts of the problem. We do. And they cannot propose real solutions, but we can. And any hesitation on our behalf is letting ourselves down, compromising our new generations and our children, and letting our country down, and leaving the space completely open for people who claim expertise, self-proclaimed experts, who really, I'm afraid, some of them at least, they don't care the least about Islam or even about national security, except in their very narrow lens. So it is not only commendable from Muslims to step in, but I think it is a duty upon American Muslims to be in the forefront of the conversation. We have nothing to hide. We have something very valuable to offer, and our hesitation will never help us by any form or shape.
Now, getting into the actual conversation, Dr. Hathout, we've kind of talked about why the need for us being in this conversation. The question that I ask you, and then we can have this conversation, is this phenomenon of violent extremism new to the Muslim community? I think that's the first thing for us to ask. Is this something that's new? It definitely is recent to from kind of the Muslim background to the U.S. Although it's not new to the U.S. I mean, we've seen violent extremists in the U.S. for many years. It's the right-wing groups. We've seen the militia groups. We've seen the neo-Nazi groups. For decades, for a century or more, the KKK was a violent extremist group based on religion that caused havoc, that killed people, that lynched people, that did so many things to people around this country. And then we saw, things like the Hutari militia that just a couple of years ago that was disbanded by the FBI. Yeah. The Atlanta Olympic bombings that was caused by a right-wing individual. The 1995 Oklahoma City bombings. So to America, violent extremism is not new. We've seen it from different ideologies and religious backgrounds. I think the Muslim conversation is newer to America. But in the Muslim world, is violent extremism a new phenomenon?
No, it is not. As I just mentioned, since the son of Adam killed his brother, there is that seed of malicious violence for private agendas or special agendas. We had periods in our history that extremism actually led to violence big time. And I need to digress here to try to define what is extremism. Extreme from what? And I'd rather claim that on any issue, as a matter of fact, on anything, extreme is to take that issue to its extreme limit, that after that you will violate the issue itself. For example, people who love Elvis Presley, they love him to the extreme that makes them believe that he is alive and not dead. They fall into the irrationality. People who loved Sayyidina Ali to the extreme, they said he is God. He wanted to see them burn. We have people who loved a singer in Egypt, Abdul Halim Hafiz. Then when he died, people throw themselves off their balconies in suicide. For everything in life, there is an extreme, and the extreme will lead you to become irrational. Once you become irrational, you are a prey of your emotionalism, and you can do things that are not acceptable. On the issue of religion, it is also clear. We had the Khawarij who killed Ali and wanted to kill Muawiyah alike. So they are kind of equal opportunity murder. And they lived, as a matter of fact, remnants of them are living up till now. So extremism is not new. And this is why the Prophet warned against it as a psychology. He said, don't go to the extreme in your religion. So, and this was in most benign situations. The man who told him, I'll fast every day, or I will never marry, I'll be completely ascetic. And the Prophet said, don't go to the extreme. The extreme is to take a good concept. When you push it beyond the limits, it becomes ugly. And it turns against the values that were adored by those very people. But because they were unchecked, and I want to underline this word, unchecked in going to the extreme, they were not nipped at the bud when they started pushing things beyond what is acceptable. They should be checked. Our counter argument should arise to prevent them from being the single voice on that issue, the way it is happening in some of our countries now.
That's interesting. You know, there's an old saying. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the saying that every age, every zaman has its own khawarij.
Yeah.
So yes. Every age will have its own group of extremists.
Absolutely.
And you know what's interesting is that, like you mentioned, extremists. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I hear you.
No, I was saying that every generation has its extremists. But what I'd like to kind of look at, is a couple of questions. The first thing is, there's this notion in the media, there's this notion about this conversation around radicalization and violent extremism, that just because you have radical ideas or just because you have extreme ideas, that leads you directly to violence. And this is something that we have to kind of think about. I mean, is this true? People might have very unpopular thoughts at a certain time. I mean, you can say that Martin Luther King had radical ideas for his time. The Prophet, peace be upon him, had very radical ideas for his time. Mahatma Gandhi had very radical ideas for his time. Malcolm X had very radical ideas for his time. But they did not necessarily go into actual acts of violence. But they were not popular. They weren't popular sentiments accepted by people. So this idea that if you have radical thoughts, you become a violent extreme. Is this something that you think is a reality, or is there more to that conversation?
No, there is more to that conversation. From the very examples that you mentioned, Harris, to make any change, you need to radically change certain things, including, for example, our Muslim world now, or the Muslim Ummah. You know that you need to challenge certain established ideas that became part of the norm. And you need to come and say, by the way, people, this is not part of the norm, because we have a standardization process laid down.
Dr. Hathout, I believe you are muted.
Oh,
I believe you're on mute. Can you unmute?
Let me call the experts. Those are the self-proclaimed experts I was talking about. Am I still muted? Can you hear me, Harris?
Now you're okay.
Now I'm okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
It seems that here they impose their own censorship. So what I was saying, Harris, is basically any movement of change carries into it the challenge to the status quo. And not the status quo organizationally, but the status quo in terms of thoughts and ideas. And I think this is why humanity progresses. But there is, from the examples you mentioned, you will notice two kinds when we read history, even in a scanty way or superficially. You find there are movements to destroy, and you have movement to construct. When I look at Martin Luther King, and when I look at Gandhi, and when I look at Muhammad, peace be upon him, I find, or Jesus Christ, I find that those people, their passion is to build up a different society that has more compassion and justice and fair dealings that will make humanity happier. There are other anarchist groups. They don't care what they build. They don't even think about building. They say what we have is bad, let us destroy it. And this is where this so-called radical ideas should be differentiated. Not every radical idea is bad, but if it is aiming at destruction, it will, and the destruction begets more destruction. It is not that I say I'll destroy the status quo and then I'll take a deep breath and start building. It does not happen this way. When you destroy the status quo, you become destructive, and the people, humanity will deal with you as such, it becomes a vicious cycle. The more they attack you, the more destructive you will become, the more they attack you, and so on and so forth. But movements of construction, of building, it rallies the human beings around it, because everybody wants a happier day for his children or her children, for their grandchildren, and for themselves. So when Martin Luther King comes and say, I have a dream, even his expression, a dream, that's something that he passionately visualizes. When the white child and black child will be together, and when people will be judged not by the strength of their character, not the color of their skin. He is offering something good. He is offering a promise, not just destroying, let us say, racism, which you cannot destroy. So
This,
I
this is very
differentiate between
interesting.
them. Yes, Haris?
Yeah, I said this is very interesting, and I want to inject here quickly because when you say that it's about destruction, you're so right. When you look at this research and the statistics about these violent extremist groups, like Al Qaeda, like Al Shabaab, like Taliban, like all of these groups, the majority of people that are victims of their acts of terror are Muslims themselves. Over 90% of the victims of these attacks by these violent extremist groups are Muslims themselves.
Yeah,
and so they're not offering something new.
No.
They're not giving Muslim societies a vision for a future. They're actually killing people.
Yeah. The 18 days of the Egyptian revolution offered so much change in the Muslim world and in the world at large, more than all these groups combined could even realize an iota of that. So destructive extremism is self-defeating. It does not lead to anything. It leads to more destruction. And we are seeing what is happening everywhere around us. Unfortunately, people fell in that binge of blood. The more they drink, the more intoxicated they get, so they drink more, and there is no end in sight. And this is where a voice should come out loud and clear and say, stop this nonsense. And don't ever dare to claim Islam unless you are ready to use the standardization of the Quran and of the model of Muhammad, peace be upon him. And it's not a rocket science. You can tell what the Quran said and how it adopted the conflict resolution through peace whenever it is possible, and you only fight those who really fight you on religion or to kick you out of your home. Otherwise, the friend and the enemy, you deal with them with kindness and fairness. This is the standard of the Quran. But to go and bomb a group of people or a market or a mosque or put a car bomb to kill whatever it kills, those are destructive people. They don't care about building. They care about destroying. And actually they destroy themselves. They destroy their countries. They destroy their religion.
This, that's again, that's such a profound point. This idea of destruction versus construction when it comes to social change and social movement and even grievances. Because there's one thing that we have to admit, that there's a lot of grievances out there that people have.
And very legitimate.
People have foreign policy grievances.
Of course.
People have domestic policy grievances. There's the grievances of places like Palestine, Iraq, and Afghanistan, even drones policy. There's a lot of grievances out there in the world that people can be passionate about. There's nothing wrong with that. I think our conscience cannot allow ourselves to see those grievances, see the suffering of people like in Syria or wherever it may be, and to say nothing and to even not feel an iota of compassion or wanting to help the situation. So I think it's important that in this conversation we state very clearly that it's okay to have grievances. You should be very passionate about issues that impact not only the Muslim world but humanity.
Yes.
And so having those grievances are okay and being passionate about them.
Yeah.
But it's then, how do you address those grievances?
Exactly.
There's the two narratives that come about there. One narrative, as you said, is a destructive narrative, and one narrative is the constructive narrative. And so when you see someone like the Boston bomber, for example, and this is something that impacts us, our community, as a Muslim American, as American Muslims, we saw these two young people. Yeah, they had grievances. Even the younger brother, it just came out today. I'm sure people read the many reports where when he was in the boat, he was bleeding in the boat. Before the police caught him, he was scribbling on the boat a note basically his final note that said, if you kill one Muslim, it's as if you're fighting or killing all Muslims. So this idea of grievance, and we're doing this because of U.S. policy in Iraq and Afghanistan. So these two brothers, apparently, they had these grievances, but the way they acted upon their grievances was problematic. And can you address that issue as well? Because I think that in itself is where we need to be thinking about how to get young people to think about it like that.
Yeah. We live in a very unjust world. We live in a world of savagery, where really the strong and the rich are preying on the weak and the meek, and there is no voice of conscience to change that. So the grievances, whether they are in Palestine or in South Central LA or in Iraq, are very real. Not only real, it is the duty of the Muslim to have a stand against that and to try the utmost to change it. But the magic word is how to change it. Let us say it is a building that is about to collapse. How do I change that situation? Am I going to put a bomb in that building to destroy it completely on the heads of people who live there? Or am I going to say, oh, people, listen to me, this building is about to collapse. If you don't forfeit this column and strengthen this base, and so on and so forth. The attitude towards the grievances, to change them, to replace them by a better situation, cannot be through destruction. And I wanted to quote a hadith of the Prophet that is very commonly quoted, but in my very humble judgment, leading to the wrong conclusions. The Prophet ﷺ said, when you see something wrong, and which is munkar means it is revolting by reasoning and by intuition and by human nature and by fitrah, something wrong, you have to change it. You change it how? With your hand. That's you have your action. This action might be rallying, educating, collecting people to vote it down or whatever. But you should be an activist in a change that thing. Suppose you could not, like if I live in a country that will not allow me to do that. It bans all opposition parties, it controls all newspapers, etc. So I am not able to educate, not able to rally, not able to do anything. So the Prophet said, if you cannot, so through your statements. In other words, make the statements of truth. The Bible said the truth shall set you free. And the same sentiment is in the Quran and in the teaching of the Prophet. Say the truth then, because the truth has an intrinsic power that either it can create the change now or will create the change later. Like the good tree in a good land that will grow and bear fruits later on. If you cannot do that, at least you psychologically and mentally resent it. Take a stand. Don't be wishy-washy. Don't be watered down with the crowd. Even if I am alone and I cannot be activist, I cannot talk to educate and raise the awareness, I should, inside me, I become my own world then that I say, I will not subscribe to that. I will not do it on myself or in my circle. And I completely resent it. People took it the other way around. That if you see something bad, fight it with your hand, like beat. If you cannot do that because you are weak and you beat the heck out of you, so at least curse them. Use your tongue to lash them. If this even is not possible, so hate them. This is, in my humble judgment, a distortion of the lesson, the very valuable lesson that the Prophet is giving us. Because if you look at the hadith, the object of the hadith The objective is to change, to achieve the change. If you don't achieve the change, so you didn't do what you need to do, what needs to be done. You just
That's
got it off your chest
that's
or whatever. So this
and
is
I think that's very important. Is that I sorry
no, go ahead.
that idea that no that idea that you mentioned at the end. The idea that you mentioned in the end is that when we do something, we want to do it to be effective,
Yes.
not just to get it off our chest or not just to cause havoc.
Exactly.
Just before we get into the next section, some people had asked about the research that I quoted about the majority of the victims of Al Qaeda and terrorism are Muslims. I put up the link on the side, so if you're interested in that research, you can go ahead and look at it. And it's done by the the Counterterrorism Center, which is a very prestigious research center on issues of terrorism. And one of the authors is a good friend of ours, Brian Fishman. Brian Fishman is very good on many of these issues and is very engaged on these issues. What I wanted to kind of move into, Dr. Hathout, now is this conversation about radicalization online, or the so-called radicalization, in quotes. I always like using the word radicalization in quotes because it can be misconstrued. This idea of violent extremism.
Yeah.
As you said, when we said that it's okay for people to have grievances, people are okay to have grievances. They should feel compassion towards issues that impact the world in a negative way. And how do we then address those grievances? One of the issues that we saw with these with the older Sarnaev brothers, one of the brothers in Boston, the older one, he used to go to one of the masajid in Boston. And at times he would say very extreme things. And one time during a khutbah, he got up and said, someone had quoted, the khatib had quoted Martin Luther King. He got up and stood up and said, I'm against you quoting a non-Muslim in a khutbah. And he created a scene. What happened was he was basically sent outside of the masjid. Now, our issue is, how do we send these people outside of the masjid? Or do we create safe spaces for them?
Yeah.
When someone has a grievance, unfortunately, a lot of masajid, a lot of mosques are afraid to talk about these political issues because they're afraid. Okay, well, maybe the FBI has sent an informant and is looking over us, or they're informants and they're hearing what we have to say. So even if we disagree with certain policies, we don't talk about it in the masjid. And one community leader famously in one of these interviews said, "We'd never talk about politics in our masjid." Now, is that the right way to handle these conversations? Are we allowing these individuals to go to the wolves, online predators, people like Anwar Awlaki, people like Adam Gadan, all these videos that are out there that if they don't get the proper training or the proper acceptance in our communities, they'll go to these people online. Should we be creating spaces for them to feel safe?
Yeah, this is a very, very important and sensitive and difficult question. I tell you why. Number one, it is exactly, parents who refuse to talk about sex to their children. What do the children do?
Yeah.
They go out and ask their friends about sex. And they are completely misled, and they do very sad things because the parents did not have the capacity, I call it the capacity, to talk to them frankly about sex. The parents blush and they stutter and stumble, and they don't have right answers to the kids. And I think I extrapolate that to take it to the masjid. The masjid, there is an imam is so keen, of course, to keep the masjid, the mosque protected. And when some person like that stands up and say the first thing that comes to the mind of that imam is, my God, we will be reported and they will come and invade the mosque, the FBI will close it, etc. So he feels that his primary duty is to protect the group. And I don't disagree with that, because definitely if you are running a group or a place, you are responsible primarily about their safety. But it's not enough, because what happens is like exactly like the boy or the girl who ran to their peers to teach them about sex. This guy will run to cyberspace. Will run to cyberspace to know about what his religion is expecting from him or from her. So it is mandatory to create programs. And the word programs are very important, because the program by nature, it's like you go to your college or your school. You don't put the program. This college puts the program. If you like it, you pay fees and you join. In the mosque, you will not pay fees, but you join the program not to change it, not to run it. If you like and you benefit from it, you go through, and hopefully by the end of the program, like any college program, by the end of this course, the student will be able to do blah, blah, blah. With the same professionalism, the mosques should create not a space, but programs to be very liberal art kind of things, where people can come to a safe haven and can express themselves completely uninhibited. But there should be the qualified faculty and the qualified staff to have a fruitful conversation, rational conversation with them, to make them reach the conclusions that are coinciding with the values of Islam, for which the mosque has been open to start with. So I cannot, it does not end my job when I say, you are a bad guy, get out of here. Because while I am maybe protecting my mosque, but I'm sending a young Muslim to the wolves. And because he cannot match these names that you are mentioned in eloquency and in quoting the Quran without out of context and rhyming the words in a dazzling way, the people become gullible and they absorb the bait. And so the programs that are designed to do that. And for example, the programs that Impact runs are very good programs. I wish to see more mosques using them.
And I think this is an important point. And here, at least us in Impact in Washington D.C. At our office in Washington, what we're going to focus on in the coming phase is to talk to policymakers and to law enforcement agencies like the FBI, like local PD, to say we need to create more of those safe spaces, because we can't have a chilling effect in our community. We can't have people scared to talk about political issues in the masjid or online or publicly because they feel that they're being watched or that they're somehow will have a file open on them. But we need to create those safe spaces because, like you said, if they don't find the proper answers, the interesting thing about when you look at a lot of these videos online that talk about grievances, that talk about jihad and terrorism and all of these issues, they're very flashy. They use very graphic images. They're very well done. They tug and they hit at the emotions of young people who are feeling things that they don't know how to deal with. Yeah. And so these videos really get them riled up. I keep going back to the example of these two brothers in Boston because it was the most recent example that impacted our community. If you look at the videos that they watched, I watched some of them because this is the kind of work that we unfortunately have to do on a daily basis to watch these videos. But you watch some of these videos, and they're very emotive. Yeah. And they're very simplistic in the way they frame the narrative. Yeah. America is at war with Islam and Muslims, so you must be with America.
Yeah.
Even if you're an American citizen.
Very simple solutions.
So, yeah.
Yeah. They lack any complexity, and you notice also on the tapes, they don't offer informations. For example, they don't offer the gist of the Quran. They don't teach hadiths. and the way they are understood, etc. So there is more fluff and more fire really than substance. And people who are newly exposed to this, it is dangerous. And this is why I wish if our youth walk the walk with us. We are no authority over them. We have no claim that we know the wisdom that they don't have. No, we are in this together. And I came out with a definition of who is youth and who is not. And in my definition, youth is anyone who is concerned about the future. Old is anyone who is concerned about the past. So it's not an age phenomenon.
That's very insightful.
It is an attitude. Am I worried more and concerned more and more preoccupied by tomorrow? Or am I locked up in yesterday or last year or the history of this or the Fitna al-Kubra or the Khawar? History is a library of books that you learn from, not that you live in and you fight its battles. Beguns are beguns. But the future is what we are supposed to be preparing now. The old ones of us, as old as myself, the young ones of us, as young as you, and as some people who are probably listening with you. So that artificial division of adults and youth is artificial.
Yeah.
I know 60 years old people who, to me, they behave and they feel and they act like children, not even youth. And I know very young people who have the wisdom of the 70s and the 80s. So it is, we don't want to fall into these artificialities. You know when the Quran say, إن هي إلا أسماء سميتموها ما أنزل الله بها من سلطان, you just made names and you believed in them and you worship them, and Allah gave no authority to that. It is a delusion that we create, and we should be liberated from delusions. We should deal with realities freely.
That's very insightful. That's very insightful because, this is the last thing I think we'll probably end with, and hopefully we'll have this conversation again soon. This idea that you were saying that a lot of these videos and a lot of this information is devoid of any substance.
Yeah.
It's just usually rhetoric and political or religious rhetoric. This goes back to studies that show, and I keep going to research because most of the work that we do is based on research. The research shows that those individuals who have a rigorous understanding of religious concepts, so they actually understand religion well, they are less likely to be involved in violence.
Absolutely.
Those people who become religious suddenly, and they skip understanding religion, going through the process of ijtihad, going through the process of critical thinking and looking at text, and go straight to politics and political ideology, they get fooled easily and fall prey to violence and on these online predators.
Yeah.
And so it's important for, like what you just said, it's important that we teach people the ability to think critically, to think beyond what's apparent and what these people say, and really move it to the next level.
Absolutely, and we should prevent the sloganization of Islam. Islam is not a bunch of slogans.
Yes.
Islam is life, is a very complex blessing from God to make us really capable of being His vicegerents on earth, to promote life, not to promote death. إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم, when He calls you for what will revive you. And this is a sharp line of demarcation between theology of death and theology of life. We are 5 times the Muazzin calls حي على الفلاح, come to success, not come to death, come to life. And Our young people have a long life ahead of them. They should rejoice in their life and in their religion, and they should enrich this life with the values of Islam that will make them happy, even if they are not in a very favorite situation now. But also, we are people of backbone and of pride. Not every thing who frowns at us, we run like scary cats. And I'm afraid to talk about politics. I'm afraid of what? A Muslim should not be afraid of nothing. A Muslim only cares about his or her closeness to God. And that will keep us in balance. So I think we burned lots of land, Harris, talking about construction, not destruction. So I wish if we have this conversation repeated again and again, inshallah. Not repeated, extended.